Hello listeners, this video discusses Samuel Johnson's essay on fiction. Samuel Johnson was born in the year 1709 and died in the year 1784. He was called as Dr. Jonshon. He is an English poet, playwright, essayist, moralist, literary critic, biographer, editor, and lexicographer. The Oxford Dictionary of National Biography calls him as arguably the most distinguished man of letters in English history. Man of letter meaning a person whose intellect, who engages in critical thinking, research, and one who reflects about the reality of society, and one who proposes solution for the normal problems of society. He was born in Lichfield. He began to write for the Gentleman's Magazine, which was a magazine founded in London in the year 1731. Samuel's early works include Life of Mr. Richard Savage, his poems London and the Vanity of Human Wishes, and his play Irene are his famous works. Johnson's dictionary appeared in the year 1755. His dictionary is a dictionary of the English language, which was claimed as one of the greatest single achievements of scholarship. His essays include the plays of William Shakespeare, his apologue, The History of Rasselas, Prince of Abinizia. He was considered as an influential person around the 17th and 18th centuries. During the late days of his life, he wrote lives of the most eminent English poets between 1779 to 81. This work comprises short biographies and critical appraisals of 52 poets. Most of them lived during the 18th century. The two important works for which Jonshon is remembered are a dictionary of the English language published in the year 1755, which is called as Johnson's Dictionary, a journey to the Western Isle of Scotland in the year 1775, which is a travel narrative about an 83-day journey through Scotland in the late summer and autumn of 1773. Let us see an outline about the Rambler. As Dr. Jonshon is busy working with his dictionary, he was ambitious and he wrote the Rambler. The Rambler is a twice-weekly periodical essay which he wrote for 2 full years, that is between 1750 to 52. By writing in the Rambler, he got needed income and also a useful respite from the strains of lexicography, as he is a lexicographer. The Rambler earlier version is The Spectator, which were written by Addison and Steele between the year 1711 to 13. After reading Addison's prose, Jonshon praised him as a model of the middle style, always equable and always easy. He chose his own style. His style would be large, often Latinate vocabulary. He balanced sentence. Dr. Jonshon was free to choose his topics. He worked under relentless deadlines. For almost 4 decades, he did his reading and thought process, during which he had accumulated a fund of moral science that was more than sufficient for such an undertaking, and he had qualified with a degree. His readers proved eagerness for the instruction that he had given. More than any of Johnson's earlier writings, the Rambler established Johnson's style, his substance, and his fame. Let us now see the summary of his essay on fiction. This is an essay from the Rambler, published in the year 1750. This essay is the 4th section of the Rambler, which was published in 1750, 31st March. Jonshon starts with a proverb, join both profit and delight in one. This is a prelude, which means which means that this work will provide intellectual profit and literary delight to those who read this work. Jonshon says that the work of fiction in the present generation seems more particularly delight as it exhibits life in its true state. The work of fiction is diversified only by accidents that daily happen in the world. The work of fiction is influenced by passions and qualities which are really to be found in conversing with mankind. He says that the kind of writing should not be like the comedy of romance, but it should incorporate with the rules of comic poetry. He says that the kind of writing should bring about natural events by easy means in order to keep up curiosity with the help of wonder. Jonshon then remarks about Scaliger, who criticizes Pontanus. Pontanus, his full name is Giovanni Pontano Pontanus. He lived between the years 1425 to 1503. He was an Italian poet and he was criticized by Julius Caesar, who lived between 1484 to 1558. Scaliger is regarded as one of the most important scholars of Europe around 1600, and Jonshon here refers Scaliger's criticism on Pontanus. He says that the writings of Pontanus are filled with the same images, meaning that the fictional writers only quote some of the images like nuptial rites, knights, captivity, deserts, machines, and the like. So he says, as Scaliger criticized Pontanus because Pontanus uses the images like lilies, roses, satires, diets, and if we take all these out from his poetry, then nothing will be left to be called as poetry. He says, like, if people like this, almost all the fiction of the last age will vanish. Dr. Jonshon now questions that why this wild strain of imagination found reception so long in polite and learned ages. He says that the fluency of language in the writer's writings will not engage the readers, but the writer has to lose himself with invention. He has to heat his mind with incredibilities. He has to produce a book without fear of criticism, without the toil of study, without knowledge of nature or acquaintance with life. He says that the task of the present writers is very difficult. It requires learning from books, and one should gain knowledge from books. And then he says that knowledge cannot be gained only by solitary diligence, but must arise from general converse and accurate observation of the living world. And he refers to Horace. He says that as Horace expresses little indulgence and therefore more difficulty, Dr. Jonshon then says that a writer would always have a fear of not being approved because such writers may just have copied somebody's works. He referred that copied work as human manners, and books should be written chiefly with the ideology of the youngsters, ignorant and the idle, and to whom they serve as lectures of conduct. Those readers, they are the entertainment of minds who are unfurnished with ideas and therefore easily susceptible of impressions, who are not fixed by principles, and therefore they can easily follow the current of fancy. They are also not informed by experience. Jonshon then says the highest degree of reverence should be paid to youth, and that nothing indecent should be suffered in order to approach their eyes or ears, sense and virtue, chastity of thought. Then he refers to the romances that was formerly written. He says that every formal romance transaction and sentiment was so remote that the reader was in very little danger of making any applications to himself. The reader amused himself with heroes and with traitors, delivers and prosecutors, and whose actions were regulated upon motives of their own, and who had neither faults nor excellencies in common with himself. Then he talks about the adventure writings. He refers adventurer as one who acts in universal drama. The young spectators fix their eyes upon the adventurer with closer attention, and they closely observe his behavior and success to regulate their own practices. He says the historical data in writing must be made of greater use than the solemnities of profused morality. The history writings must be preserved in order to convey the knowledge of vice and virtue with more efficacy than oximes and definitions. He then refers that most fictional writers, they write about liberty, they do not invent anything, they only create objects from the mass of mankind in order to employ the attention of mankind. He then says any work should be like a diamond, it should be polished by art, it should be buried among common stones, and only then it will be considered as the greatest excellency of art. He then says that it is fair to imitate nature, but it is necessary to distinguish those parts of nature. In contrast, most writers represent life. Their works portray discolored passion or wickedness. He then says that the purpose of these writings is surely not only to show mankind, but it should provide less hazard, and it should teach the means of avoiding the snares which are laid by treachery for innocence, without infusing any wish for that superiority with which the betrayer flatters his vanity. And he says that many writers, for the sake of following nature, they mingle both good and bad qualities in their principal personages. He refers those writers as corrupters of the world and the one who murder art without pain. And he says that some are advanced writers, they do not pay attention to the consequences of virtue, and that those men are observed by Jonathan Swift. He called them as grateful in the same degree as they are resentful. He then says that men consider both good and evil are springing from the same root, and that they will spare the one for the sake of the other. He then says that in narratives where historical veracity has no place, as a critic, he could not discover anything that exhibits the most perfect idea of virtue. He then says that vice for vice is necessary to be shown, should always discussed, not should the grace of gaiety or the dignity of courage be so united with it to reconcile it to the mind. Making a reference of this quotation, he says that the virtue is the highest proof of understanding, and that vice is the natural consequence of narrow thoughts, that it begins in mistake and ends in ignominy. Hope this video helps. If you have query about this, please write it down, and if you have any suggestion for videos, make a reference below. Thank you for listening.